of their own frustration. Different borders, same pain. Different flags, same struggle. And as Tanzania descended into confusion, the fire spread north, unseen but unstoppable. Hashtags turned into movements. Whispers turned into plans. In the slums of Kibera, in the dormitories of Eldoret, in the quiet alleys of Kisumu, voices began to unite. They called themselves the Umoja generation. Umoja, Swahili for unity. They believed that Africa's strength lay not in borders drawn by colonizers, but in shared courage, the courage to demand change. And so when Tanzania's Gen Z refused to back down, Kenyan youth didn't just applaud. They prepared to join. Not for chaos, not for war, but for awakening. They said, if the system won't hear us from here, we will carry our voices where it started. And in the early hours of a humid Sunday morning, hundreds began the journey south, not in convoys or protests, but in shadows, quiet groups on motorbikes, buses, and footpaths, blending into traders, travelers, and students. They weren't running away. They were crossing over, to join hands with Tanzania's restless youth, to show that the struggle for freedom had no border. As dawn broke over the Namanga border post, witnesses reported a strange sight. Dozens of young people kneeling on the roadside, holding nothing but placards that read, "We are not crossing to fight. We are crossing to wake Africa." The road between Namanga and Arusha is long, quiet, and deceptively beautiful. To travelers, it is just a trade route. But to the youth who walked it that morning, it was a line drawn between two worlds, the Africa that was and the Africa that must be. They marched not in noise, but in rhythm, their feet beating softly against the dust like a heartbeat too long suppressed. From a distance they looked ordinary, students, riders, vendors, but every step carried a silent declaration. We have crossed. By midday, the sun blazed white across the plains. Heat shimmered on the tarmac. Yet they did not stop. They carried flags, not of Kenya, not of Tanzania, but of unity. Cloths painted by hand with words that had become their scripture. One Africa, one voice. The Tanzanian border guards watched, uncertain. There were no weapons, no chants, just a tide of young faces, eyes fixed forward. Confusion replaced hostility. For the first time in decades, soldiers hesitated to follow orders. Drones circled above. The footage would soon flood social media feeds around the world. Kenyan youth walking side by side with Tanzanians, a silent procession that stretched for miles, glowing orange under the sun. By evening, the march reached Longido, a small Tanzanian town that had slept through many decades of quiet history. Teachers joined. Even elders, once skeptical, whispered blessings as the youth passed. It was no longer a march. It was a pilgrimage, a generation seeking not revenge but renewal. In Dar es Salaam, government broadcasts called them foreign agitators. But by then, the narrative had escaped control. Across Africa, the footage was everywhere. On phones in Ghana, in cafes in Nigeria, in classrooms in South Africa. It wasn't just Kenya and Tanzania anymore. It was a continent seeing itself reflected. From Kampala to Kigali, students began sharing the same symbol, the violet circle of youth resistance, the same one first seen atop the control tower of Tanzania's seized airport weeks before. The circle had returned, but this time it wasn't rebellion. It was resurrection. By the third day, international media arrived. Headlines clashed with reality. Some called it an invasion. Others called it a miracle. Cameras caught young men and women standing shoulder to shoulder, holding a banner that read, "Borders divide rulers, not people." As soldiers advanced, the crowd did not retreat. They simply knelt, hundreds of them, heads bowed in silence. No words, no weapons, just stillness. For a brief electric moment, the world held its breath. Then, without warning, the soldiers lowered their rifles. No one had ordered it. It was instinct, the human refusal to shoot at a reflection of oneself. That image, soldiers turning away, youth unbroken, would travel across the globe within hours. As darkness fell on the fourth night, lightning rippled over the plains. From the storm clouds above Arusha, a single voice from a pirate radio broadcast broke the static. The youth have crossed, and they are not leaving. By the fifth dawn, The line between Kenya and Tanzania had dissolved, not on maps, but in hearts. The two nations, long separated by politics, now breathed as one pulse, a rhythm born not of war, but of awakening. The border posts stood deserted. Guards abandoned their stations. Flags fluttered in confusion, unsure of which country they now represented. What began as a march had turned into a movement. Fluid, unpredictable, and impossible to stop. They called it the Border Awakening. It wasn't led by generals or politicians. It was led by ordinary people, the children of farmers, students, mechanics, and dreamers, united not by ideology, but by exhaustion. Exhaustion from being silenced. Exhaustion from being used, praised during elections and forgotten after. As the sun climbed high over the plains of Arusha, a sea of youth filled the horizon, Kenyan and Tanzanian flags waving together, tied into a single knot. From above, it looked like the continent itself was before an old colonial monument. A cracked stone pillar built by foreigners long gone. They covered it in cloth and paint, transforming it into a new symbol, a violet circle, the sign of a generation reclaiming its voice. Cameras captured the moment. The footage went viral before the networks could censor it. Across Africa, universities erupted with solidarity marches. From Lusaka to Kigali, graffiti appeared overnight with the same message. Borders are scars. We are the healing. The world began to take notice. News anchors debated whether it was hope or anarchy. Diplomats issued statements of concern. But no government could define what was unfolding, because it was not political. It was generational. And then came the silence. In one synchronized move, both Tanzanian and Kenyan, governments cut national internet access. Total digital blackout. Phones dead, screens dark, networks offline. For the first time, the movement lost its connection. Or so the governments believed. But Wi-Fi to communicate. They had learned another language. The language of rhythm, of symbols, of eyes that met across a crowd and understood. Messages began to travel through coded graffiti, folded notes, even the patterns of lights in windows at night. Entire cities became living networks, a human internet built from courage and memory. In Nairobi, students projected holograms of violet circles onto skyscrapers. In Dar es Salaam, fishermen used flashlights to send signals across the harbor. And in Arusha, the birthplace of the new unity, thousands lit torches and raised them toward the stormy sky. They called it the Night of the Thousand Lights. From space, satellites captured a breathtaking image, a glowing line of fire stretching across the border, flickering like a heartbeat visible from the heavens. But to those below, it wasn't spectacle. It was a vow. We will not go back. Governments responded the only way they knew, with force. Armored trucks rolled through villages. Drones patrolled highways. Helicopters thundered above fields once full of song. Yet every time soldiers approached, the youth dispersed like smoke, melting into farms, forests, and cities, only to reappear elsewhere, stronger. It was no longer a protest. It was a presence, a living, breathing consciousness that could not be contained. As the crackdowns intensified, rumors began to spread that a secret meeting was taking place somewhere deep in the hills near Mount Meru, where young organizers from Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and even Rwanda had gathered to form what they called the Pact of the New Dawn. No one knew who started it. No one claimed to lead it. But intelligence reports later confirmed the meeting was real. There, under a canopy of rain and thunder, the world watched with awe and fear. Was this the birth of a new African unity, or the spark of something darker? As morning broke over the seventh day, the first unmarked military convoy rolled toward Arusha. Cameras on rooftops caught the images. Trucks without insignia, soldiers without flags. And then, for the first time in a week, state television came back on. The screen flickered. The anchor's voice trembled as he read a short announcement. Curfew is declared across all border regions. Foreign interference is suspected. All gatherings are now illegal. Then, static. The screen went black. But in that darkness, one message appeared, painted across the walls of Arusha in bright violet. We are still here. When the curfew fell, it did not bring silence. It brought whispers. millions of them moving faster than bullets, deeper than fear. For the first time, Kenya and Tanzania's skies were empty. No flights, no broadcasts, no signals. But beneath that stillness, a storm was forming. The governments believed they had regained control. Checkpoints were re-established, the army occupied every major town, and foreign journalists were expelled. But the revolution had already changed shape. It was no longer in the streets. It was in the air. It had entered the collective mind. The youth had learned that power wasn't only seized through confrontation. It could also be absorbed through unity. Even as drones circled above and loudspeakers blared warnings, the crowds did not gather, but the message continued to spread through invisible networks. Coded documents, USB drives hidden inside food trucks, flash drives taped beneath benches, and signals embedded in music tracks uploaded to underground channels. Every rhythm, every beat, every sound carried fragments of a larger story. The story of an Africa refusing to remain silent. The authorities began to notice patterns. Graffiti reappearing overnight even after being erased. Violet lights projected onto ministry walls. Entire neighborhoods flipped new channels. Their own voices. Churches, mosques, and classrooms quietly adopted the same symbol. The violet circle, the sign of Umoja, unity. It appeared on blackboards, on street murals, even on the clothes of children who barely understood its meaning, only that it represented hope. It was not rebellion. It was rebirth. One night, a message appeared simultaneously across multiple hacked TV networks in Nairobi, Dodoma, and Dar es Salaam. No one claimed responsibility. No one traced its origin. The screen flickered, and a familiar voice spoke, a calm, soft female voice, recognizable yet ghostly. Borders are lines they draw to divide our courage, but courage travels light. It crosses mountains. It crosses hearts. You cannot arrest an idea whose time has come. The voice lasted 22 seconds. Then the screen went black. Some said it was artificial intelligence, an imitation. Others swore it was the missing Tanzanian president, Samia Hassan, speaking from exile, her voice reclaimed by the youth. No proof ever surfaced. But for millions listening in the darkness, it didn't matter. The message had already become truth. That night was remembered as the voice of the violet. From that moment onward, the movement stopped calling itself a protest. It became something else, a philosophy, a way of being. In cities, youth began to rebuild what the chaos had broken. Cleaning streets, restoring schools, teaching each other skills, creating community farms, sharing knowledge without waiting for state approval. The movement that began in defiance had transformed into reconstruction. Where governments had divided, the youth united. Where leaders had failed, they organized. And for the first time in decades, a generation stopped asking permission to change. They simply did it. Across the border, Tanzania's capital remained tense. Arrests continued. Curfews lingered. But the spirit could not be contained. Even among the soldiers, the silence began to crumble. Whispers spread through the ranks. Young officers, barely older than the protesters, questioning who they were truly protecting. In one viral clip later leaked to the world, a soldier was seen lowering his weapon and removing his helmet, revealing a violet band tied around his wrist. The caption beneath the video read, "We are not enemies. We are mirrors." The world took notice. Headlines from Europe, America, and Asia tried to describe what was happening. But words like uprising or civil unrest no longer fit. This wasn't chaos. It was coherence. It was an idea too vast for containment, an idea that governments could neither outlaw nor negotiate with. By the 30th day, the border between Kenya and Tanzania remained under military lockdown. But something extraordinary had hundreds of young people standing hand in hand, Kenyans, Tanzanians, and others who had traveled from far beyond. No slogans, no banners, only silence. And then from somewhere deep in the crowd, a single voice began to hum, a low, trembling note that rose and spread until it became a chorus, filling the air with the sound of defiance, unity, and rebirth. It wasn't a national anthem. It was something new, the song of a generation that had crossed borders not to destroy, but to redefine them. History remembers nations by the wars they fought, the borders they drew, and the leaders they crowned. But one day, It will remember Africa not for the lines that divided it, but for the generation that erased them. The youth did not seek permission. They sought purpose. And in crossing that border, they discovered something greater than power. They discovered themselves,